All right, so we're starting out talking about miniatures. We talked about miniatures a little bit. Yeah, I think it was last semester. It was either last semester or the semester before it. But we're going to just delve back into that because it's a huge part of production design if you want it to be. If the production thinks about it, sometimes you can have, if you shoot with miniature sets, if you make a miniature set and you actually shoot with it with some green screen, like on the screen right now, you can actually get some really cool and relatively inexpensive shots that you might not be able to get otherwise. For big budget films, they opt to go with that because they can save a lot of money compared to building like an actual set or going to an actual location. For lower budget films, it's just a more viable way to actually get some shots that you want that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. You just have to spend some time being creative with actually making it look realistic enough and know what you're doing and how to shoot it. When you mix miniatures with CGI buildings, that can also be done to have a mix of practical and visual effects. When you are making miniature sets, they always say to give yourself room, make it easier to get all the angles and the distances you want, because the camera, you want it to be the right size. So you want to be able to get as far away or as close as you need to get the shot you want. And so if you can see this, they have like a big, huge table that they're putting it on usually. And it's like a big open space that they're putting little miniature things on. And then they're taking their camera however far away or close they need to get the shot that they need. So it's always a good idea if you're trying to make miniatures to do it in an open space, because you'll have more room and more options for shooting it and for lighting and stuff like that, which you also need to do. You'll want a lens with a close minimum focal distance. This actually comes from No Film School. So I think it's letter A in the syllabus. They were talking about miniatures. The video is called Turn Cheap Miniatures into Awesome Visual Effects. He said you'll want a lens with close minimum focal distance, and he recommends a wide angle lens so you can create some depth when you move the camera. You do it with a wide angle lens, the stuff closer to the lens is going to look larger. And so you can do the green screen parts and you can shoot the miniature with a wide angle so it looks like it's larger. So if you actually look right here, the trees look larger than they are and everything looks larger because they're using
it looks so cool, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it looks really cool the way they did it and the effects. It looks a little grainy right now, but that's just because the picture is actually small. So
when you discover, like, there's a few Instagrams, I forgot the exact ones, but like James recommended one in the first semester, I think, or second semester. When you actually like watch the process of like the beginning to the end product and the visuals, it is unreal. It is the most incredible thing and most beautiful and intricate work of craftsmanship. You're just blown away.
Even like large movies do, like I said, they do it so that they don't have to make a huge, they can do practical effects. Some movies that do like a bridge that has a flooding or something like that, or some kind of destruction on the bridge, like a big, huge, like the San Francisco Bridge or something like that. They do sometimes they do it with a miniature, and that way they can actually blow it up. They can actually make like a small little flood that rips it apart and makes it look a lot more realistic than what they might be able to get with CGI. Because while CGI is good, it's a lot of science and data and math to get it to look exactly right. And sometimes it's just really hard to get it to look realistic. So a lot of independent films especially, but also larger films will try to do practical effects when they can, because they just like the look of it for the most part. A lot of directors anyway. They also recommend using foam board or something malleable to set up your miniature on so that you can poke stuff into it. So instead of doing it on a solid surface, you do it on something that, like poster board or something like that, where you can pin stuff into it, little trees, you can make a little toothpick part and like shove it down in. So now it's not going to move. With miniatures, you definitely don't want the stuff to move around because that'll make it be very obvious that it's a miniature. So you want everything to be set in place while you're moving your camera around and the lighting and doing all the effects to make it look realistic. You can add depth in post-production with depth of field and focus, dust, fog, or other elements for the foreground. You can even see this right here. They have like some elements like some fog and some lighting elements to make it look, to just add some depth to it while they're doing their shot. That way there's something in the foreground, in the background, and you're not really paying as much attention to the miniature itself.
I've also heard like them talking about maybe doing it a little blurrier and then just adding a light contrast so that the details can appear, but not enough to where you would see that it's a sculpture, that it's a painting, that it's a creation.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing that they say to do is add flashlights and other elements to the miniatures to give them practical lighting. Be sure to test them, as some lights will be far too much and give away that it's miniatures. So you can't just use any lights for every shot. You have to be sure to have the right amount of light, because if it's too bright, it's not going to look real, or it's going to blow out your camera or overblow it to make it look ugly. So you have to really work with that. And then if you're trying to do like a little building, you're making windows, little glass panels and stuff like that for the window panes, then putting like little, what's it called? Like those little Christmas lights that are just like one little tiny candle looking light. Putting that inside of it can make it look like a light is on, or like, some of the people's lights are on, and you can just have some that the light goes through and some that don't. And just things like that to make it really come alive and have just another element of depth. That's always good. So using lighting and just small lights to really make the scene come alive. If it's a scene like a city, especially, there are ways to do that with miniatures. And then they say to test it and also be patient, because it's going to look bad until you change it and tweak it to look good. So take your time and know that it may never look as good as it did in your head. So another thing to think is, you might have this really cool shot in your head and it's just not turning out that way. They say, don't let that get you down. It's really hard to get a shot. They're talking about it from an independent budget side. So it's really hard to get a shot to look exactly the way you want it to in your head when you're doing it on a budget and you're doing it yourself, especially if you're not an artist or a miniature artist. Even if you have a miniature artist, it's still like, your budget is limiting what you're able to do. So sometimes it's not going to look exactly like it does in your head, or not as good as it does in your head. That doesn't mean it doesn't look good or cool. Maybe that rock doesn't look as realistic as you wanted it to, but hopefully the people aren't going to pay attention to it. So that's another thing. You want to be able to work around the miniature. Once you build it and you start moving things around and tweaking it, then you need to look at it in the camera and say, okay, what is working and what isn't? Because you can also work around that stuff. Like for this shot, he could have said those rocks on the sides looked not realistic. So then he decided to put some lightning and stuff in the background so that your eyes are drawn to that. So there are other ways, or you could add fog or something in front of it to make it less noticeable, or make it blurred, make it have some depth of field. There are ways to work around it to make it people's eyes focus on something that you want them to focus on, so that they're not looking at everything and being like, oh, this is definitely not real, because that'll bring them out of the movie. So with miniatures, all that stuff, you want to make sure that you are just trying to do your best. It's going to look bad. Then you start tweaking it and figuring out how to make it look better. And then you start thinking, how can I work around these limitations to make it look the best it can and to draw people's eyes where you want it to go. This next stuff comes from Steve Ramsden. It's letter B in the syllabus. The video is how to use miniature models as your movie sets, like Titanic. He says also to use a wide angle lens at a high f-stop to keep as much in focus as possible, and shoot it at a higher frame rate to get more smooth details.
Was Titanic a miniature?
They did use a miniature on it. I'm not sure if it was all a miniature, but I do know they used.
I think they probably.
There was a lot of miniature work in the Titanic.
Oh,
She made me watch a huge documentary about it. I have a friend who it's one of his favorite movies, and we watched a documentary about it. And there was a lot of use of miniatures. They actually sell replicas. Obviously, it's not going to look exactly the same, but there are some incredible miniatures that were used and that people actually buy replicas of, and will do like little projects where they will use the replicas themselves, build it, it's incredibly intricate to build. There are many pieces.
Oh, that's good. Look how deep it actually was.
Yeah.
The water.
No, yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of internal work.
Oh yeah.
Done with.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah. No, that's
cool.
They
also built like big pieces. They built individual.
Yeah, it's basically a pool where they put water in and then they work around.
So the way that they did was like it was partially miniature work, partially built partial sets. Like they would build the front. A real picture of it. I don't they would build the front of the boat. They would build the front of the boat and then have.
Oh yeah, for the scenes where they're like on the railing and stuff.
Yeah.
Leonardo and Kate Winslet. It's Kate Winslet, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they'd be on the front of the boat. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
After saving with customized car insurance from Liberty Mutual, I customized everything.
Giant ship to sink it. Like, yeah, wait, Oshries and fisheries would have had their heads.
It is really impressive because I believe it was either 1996 or between 1996 and 1998 is when the movie came out, if I'm not mistaken. And just all of look at that. It's incredible.
No, it's just like the intricacy and the detail and the thoughts to do it is what makes it cool. It's just like how it is.
No, I think this is just them copying it though. I don't think this is a real movie.
Yeah, that's what I said. They do copies today because even the miniatures you buy off Amazon and stuff are incredibly detailed and intricate and have like a bajillion pieces and they light up and all this stuff. And people will do recreations of the Titanic scenes using those miniatures that you buy and build.
No, that makes sense because
that's how detailed they are.
Like the Leonardo DiCaprio, like Da Vinci paintings and stuff. You can't just you can copy it, but it's never going to be the same as the original.
All right, so it looks like it was still very large. It was just
modeling.
It was a miniature. It was still a miniature, of course, but it was still a very large miniature. If you look at the people in the bottom left corner.
I think they built
they used for the destruction of it, and that's another thing. Miniatures are sometimes used where it looks like a huge set, but really in real life, if that was a real set, it would be like 12 times larger, 15 times, 20 times. So they sometimes scale it down that much, but they don't scale it down to the point where it's like on a table.
For that big ocean scene where you see the entire thing, they used a small one, and then there was also the scene where it was in the background, when they're like in front of it. I think it was like in the beginning of the movie or something. There was part of it was built just like the front of it for them to be in front of it or something like that. It's been a really long time, so I'm sorry if I don't get it all right. It's been a really long time, but I do remember a lot of them like, oh, we built this part, or oh, we built a smaller version of it, and then we built a medium version of it, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and we're gonna watch a movie based on its miniatures next Monday. It's gonna be Lord of the Rings, the first one. All three of the Lord of the Rings, I believe The Hobbit as well, all used a lot of different miniatures from different scales and sizes to get different shots.
It is incredible and impressive and so detail oriented. It scares me. I'm like, imagine the hours of work that went into that.
Months of work.
Oh, right.
Do you know how much that cost? Do you know what that budget was for Titanic?
1 second.
Yeah,
1 second.
Oh, okay.
It was probably in 100 million or
200 million.
200 million. Okay.
Yes.
No, double what I thought.
That's a lot for back then too. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
It is so much for back then.
And they still opted to go with this because obviously it'd be a lot cheaper to do the destruction of this whole ship on a smaller scale than trying
with a budget of 200 million, not including CGI distribution and marketing. So it says with a budget of 200 million, not including distribution and marketing. At the time, it was the most expensive film ever made and held the title until Cameron's blockbuster Avatar surpassed it in 2010.
Yeah. Cool. What's the biggest, like the most expensive movie ever made now?
Before it was Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm pretty sure it's probably a Marvel movie. Let me look it up now.
All right, while she's doing that, so you went on, you're doing miniatures. You want to use a wide angle lens at a high f-stop to keep as much in focus as possible. And you want to shoot it at a higher frame rate to get more smooth details. The reason why you want to keep so much in focus is because it's a miniature. And if you're shooting with a lens, you're either going to have the entire background blurred out when you're shooting your foreground element, which is your subject.
Yeah, it's still Pirates of the Caribbean, Stranger Tides. Let me see. Wait, it doesn't show. What the heck? Okay, let me see how much it. Oh, here it is. 379 million.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Goodness. It's a lot.
Yeah.
All right. But anyway, with a miniature, the reason why you want to use a wide angle lens and keep it all in focus is because when you have a background in focus, if you're shooting outside in real life, in like actual real life, the actual size that everything is, once you get to a certain focal length, everything in the background is either going to be in focus or it's all going to be out of focus. And so since you are showing the landscape of things with a miniature like this, you want to keep it all in focus because it's supposed to look like a lot of it's pretty far away, like it's a forest or it's a mountain scene. So if you were using an actual lens on it and it was a real location, that stuff would either all be in focus or it would all be out of focus because you'd be focusing on your subject. So when you're shooting a miniature, keep that in mind because you can always blur it later in post, the miniature spot, the miniature stuff, and you can keep the green screen portion in focus if you are doing a large subject foreground and making it look like the background, but you're just using a miniature for the background.
Depending on how far the subject is, they might also key them in to the image of the miniature as well, which I've seen.
Yeah, with what do you what? With green screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You also want to be sure to keep note on the angle and the movement of the miniature shots and the green screen footage so that they match up and blend together. So if you're ever using a green screen and trying to shoot footage, be sure you know what the camera did with the miniature and what the camera's doing with the green screen footage. Unless you're just going to put a green screen without movement, but then it won't, and you're going to add digital movement later. Like that can happen, but it's usually good to try to get it matching on set if you can. Larger budgets or larger budgeted independent films will do mechanized tools to actually make sure that it does the exact same movement for both shots. And they'll set the settings up to make sure it's doing the exact same movement in the exact same way, or not in the exact same way, because they have to multiply it they either have to divide it or multiply it to make sure that whatever size the real footage against the green screen is going to be doing the same movement that it would in the scale that they're shooting the miniature at. So if you're shooting a miniature at this size, you have to do way less or way more movement. You have to do way less movement whenever you're shooting the real live action people, because otherwise they're going to move in, they're going to get larger way too quickly. But if you're shooting on something like this, you can do a little bit more realistic movement because it's almost life size. It's just scaled down maybe 4, 10, 12 times or something like that. So scaling is very important whenever you're talking about miniatures and making sure the camera movement and the camera angle stay to that scale.
I would imagine you'd also have to do test test footage to make sure that everything matches in case you need to make any last minute adjustments, last minute changes. To make sure
you should
that
definitely plan it and test it out whenever you're doing miniatures of any kind. Before, if you're going to shoot actors on a green screen and try to match them to the miniature stuff, you should always try to get your miniature stuff done first. That way you have it and you know what you need, and then do tests on non-actors for the green screen footage until you have it right, so that when the actors are actually there, you can just get it done and it can not take so long, because you definitely don't want it to take too long or you have to pay the actors over and over again because you're taking multiple days to do it. Or you just shoot it and then it doesn't match up, and then trying to fix it in post is pretty hard. So,
and you're also taking up more of their time as well that could be used for other things. So it's a waste of money and waste of time for everyone.
If you don't want to create the miniatures yourself, there's also places that you can go to buy miniature pieces. You can do that from like craft stores like Michael's and other places like that. There's also websites that do miniatures and sell them. Some of them are more for like doll houses and things like that, but they still have things like this. Like if you're doing a kitchen scene, you might want to go on a miniature dollhouse website, because they have little jars of jams and they have little chip bags and little pottery plants and all this other stuff that you could put in the kitchen to make it look like an actual scene if you're shooting that.
Oh, I don't know if they still have those, but I remember there used to be these little shops where you could actually buy miniature furniture for old doll houses and little collector's items and stuff like that.
It might be like arts and craft stores like Michael's and other ones like that. They have miniature trees and things like that. So they probably have, I would assume they have like furniture and stuff too. I'm not exactly sure, but I do know they have trees and they have plants and outdoor stuff at least. So I'm pretty sure they have the other stuff as well. Then there are other people that use 3D printers to print out and create small items and elements. Others create items from scratch using styrofoam, clay, cardboard, silicone, and other materials.
Oh, Etsy. You can also get it made on Etsy. There are a lot of people that work with 3D models, people that work with wood carvings and wood craftsmanship, and they will make to scale what you want, depending on what it is. You can ask for a custom order, just give them an idea and ask for how much they would charge, and for materials included, because more often than not, they're going to need extra materials for your custom work. But more often than not, it's still going to be cheaper than, it might be a little pricier than like high scale manufactured type thing, like big scale manufactured things, but it will probably be easier to find if it's something very specific, and it will probably look better because it is made for that specific purpose. It is made to that specific scale, and you are able to follow along in the process.
Yeah, it'll be more customized too. It'll be more unique. So that is definitely an option to like do that. There's also websites that will print out 3D prints, or just companies, not even just websites, but you create the 3D model, or you buy them from 3D model sites, and then you send them the things you need to be printed out, and it's just like 2D prints, but they do it for 3D, and then they either ship it to you or you go pick it up if it's close by enough.
And they do all kinds of like props and customizable things as well. So it's not just like a piece of furniture. It can be different cups, plates, like if you want it to look more antique looking, like if you want something to look very specific. They even do
anything you can imagine, they can make a small version of it.
Or big too, that's what I'm saying. I just really have gotten into Etsy craftsmanship lately. I follow a lot of them on Instagram, and to see the detail and the custom work is really cool.
All right, so when you're shooting miniatures, these guys say you also want to shoot it in layers. It's better to shoot it in layers so you have multiple things to work with. If you're shooting video, you have to make sure the movements are the same. If you can't make the movements the exact same, then you can't really shoot in layers like this as much as you can if you have something. They used Edelkrone. There's other ones that you can buy that are like sliders and things like that, that are automatic. You set the settings, it does the thing, and then it resets itself, and then you can do it again and again and again.
Which is awesome.
So that way the shot is the exact same, and you can line it up with different lighting and different elements to make it, combine it all together later in post-production. So with layers, you know, they did like the lighting, they lit the background, and then you can see like the foreground is all dark, and then they lit just with like natural lighting, no artificial lights, and that's kind of dark, but it adds a little bit of elements, especially on the trees. And then they did like a nice little sunrise or sunset look of lighting to get some more elements to pop.
Yeah, it also would help when you're blending them in to create dimension and shadow so that it looks more natural, like it's actually outside. And
yeah, exactly. And then that's why they did this one to make it look more atmospheric, like there's light rays shining through. They sprayed some, what's it called? Some fog to get it to look a little more, well, to get the light rays to shine through pretty much. And then, you know, they did the look of the sun. They did a light to make it look like there was the sunlight coming and shining it the way they wanted it to. And then they did something else right here. I think, actually, no, that's the final composite. So they lit it all together. They put the elements that they wanted. They kicked out the other ones that were too bright or didn't make sense for where the light was coming from. And then they did a color grade over it. And that was their final composite. So doing layers, it allowed them to have the elements that they wanted to have in and kick out the ones that they didn't care about or didn't make sense to the light. But even if it doesn't make sense, sometimes you want to make sure that they see the roof tiling, you know, they need to see that or something. They need to see the tree because that's important later. And so then you might just put it, you do the composite with the layer that showed the trees, and that way they can see that and that pops out and stands out. Even though it doesn't really make sense, realistically speaking, most people won't really notice unless you do something very against reality. This next stuff comes from, I think it's Manilature, like miniature, but it's Manilature. Letter Q in the syllabus. So it is do-it-yourself miniature beginners, tools and materials they use for do-it-yourself miniature dollhouse making. But dollhouse making is the same with other miniatures, buildings, other things you want to make. So a lot of the tools are going to be the exact same. So some tools they recommend for making miniatures are a self-healing cutting board. It means when you cut it, it's kind of like memory foam in that it just kind of goes back in the way it was originally. That way it doesn't get all torn up like a cutting board would if you're cutting meat on it. These ones are specifically made and they have all of these dimensions on it, so it's easier to scale down your miniature size, make sure the chair is the right size compared to the couch, compared to the TV and whatever else you're making, to make sure everything is going to look right. Something's not going to look like a huge chair in the middle of the room. Oh yeah,
because can you imagine all that work and then, oh crap, it doesn't.
I made the chair too big.
Yeah.
I made the chair, 1/3 and everything else is 1/4. Now it doesn't look right. So you want to make sure whatever you're scaling to, you keep everything to that scale. And these kinds of things, rulers and stuff like this help a lot.
And I can imagine that'd be so much easier of a mistake to make than you'd think, because you're making so many things and oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So self-healing cutting board, it has all of this stuff. It's good for it has the lines to make sure you're cutting straight or drawing straight, and the little box grid to make sure you can do it to whatever scale you want, as well as the ruler on the top. And then of course it doesn't leave cut marks all over it. It self-heals. Scissors, cut stuff. A cutter, a box cutter. A precision knife to really get fine-tuned details. A wire cutter. White glue. Silly glue. Hot glue. Adhesive glue. A metal ruler or a few different sizes of a metal ruler.
What's silly glue? Is that like the colored glue?
Honestly, I don't really know. I think silly glue is silicone liquid.
I should have used my brain for that.
So it's for like silicone. I guess it's for like silicone melding together two pieces of silicone or something. Because different glues are going to react differently to different materials. If you're using real wood, you're going to need wood glue. Whatever you're using, make sure you have the glue for it. But this is just what the stuff that she was recommending.
Yeah, contrary to popular belief, Gorilla Glue does not work for everything.
It works for everything, just not as well. Some stuff it doesn't stick as well too. So that's why they have all these different glues. Metal rulers, that way when you're cutting against it, it's not ruining the ruler and it's not rubbing off all the numbers and the things you need to make sure you're making the right size. A triangle ruler, that way you can cut perfect square angles, making stuff perfect squares and whatever else you need to do. Compass ruler, circles and things like that. Tweezers, that way when you're ready to set it up, if you're making a little tiny miniature library, you got to put all those books on the shelf. You got to pick them up with some tweezers. It's a lot easier than trying to do it with your fingers. A Dremel with different attachments. This will have like a sander, a little tiny saw, that kind of stuff. It can act as a screwdriver with some attachments. So it's a tool that really helps do all that type of stuff. Sanding down is the main thing people use it for, I think, but I can imagine for miniatures, a little drill might come in handy sometimes.
Have you ever used it?
I've used it before, yeah. It's just like a little sander. Like basically you just put a little, I've only used it for sanding, but it's the little end has like a little.
Oh, I know. I've seen them before. I think I've used it.
Yeah, and you just put it against something and it starts shaving it down.
Or somebody's. Yeah. That's fun.
And there's stuff called chipboard, cardboard, toothpicks, popsicle sticks, barbecue sticks, colored paper and different kinds of fabric, different colors, different patterns, and just different materials in general. Felt fabrics and different colors of that. That could be for like grasses and trees and things like that. Yarn, wire, you can get different colors as that as well. That's where the wire cutters come in. Poster paints, acrylic paints, and spray paint. Then there's some other stuff that they say to use as well, which is a scale ruler. So that would be good. Architects use that and things like that, but that's to make miniatures pretty much. It's to make it to scale. So it helps keep everything to the right scale you are making it to. If it's supposed to be one foot, then you can look at your scale ruler and know that you need to bring it down to, let's say 1 inch. You're like, okay, I'm gonna bring it down. It's gonna be 1/12 as big. Spare knife blades. That's for your precision knife. You want to make sure that those are always sharp so they cut really easily. You don't want to have to go back and cut and try to cut again, because then it's going to be not as precise, of course. A leveler. This will show you if something is leveled in different angles, whether it be horizontally, vertically, or even diagonally. If you get one like this, the little bubble should appear exactly in the center if you want it completely leveled. Something called a set square. That's also to help get perfect square cuts and things like that. A spray bottle. Sometimes you'll need to spray water on stuff, or you might want to get a little bit of like gray liquid to make something look a little more dirty, or a little brown liquid, and just lightly, gently spray it and then rub it over without getting too much on it. Polystyrene, XPS foam, an airbrush, paint brushes, and basically just other crafting materials you'll find in an arts and crafts store. A lot of that stuff's going to come in handy if you are making miniatures, because you never know what you're really going to need. And if you get creative, you can make something look like many different things. So if you have a little ball of yarn, you might be able to make that look like a bush. You might be able to make that look like a wire coming out of a TV, you know, different things for different reasons and different purposes. So you want to have a lot of that different little stuff if you're trying to make a bunch of miniatures. So this website actually had some tips to go over for miniatures. I was going to go over a few of them. Just read them out. If I can see you. So they say, carefully measure the elements of your set and maintain the proportions. Stay true to the scale you've chosen. Keep it in a typical size, like 1/6, might be a good idea for the start. This particular one is very practical since it's large enough to manipulate with and get a good level of detail, but also small enough to fit in your room or garage. There's also a large assortment of dolls and props that size that can be bought. Put the set on a table or some sort of platform so you can reach from underneath and make adjustments. Glue all the models well. You don't want anything to move when it's not supposed to because it'll ruin the shot. And a huge amount of work is going to be lost if that happens. Make a lot of tests with your set before you go too far into construction, not to find yourself in a situation when everything has to be redone from scratch. So as you're going, if you're making a whole room, be sure to test it, make sure it's working the way you wanted it to as you go, so you don't get done with the entire room and then realize that it's not going to work. Find the right materials to make it look real. Foam, plastic, metal, wood, and silicone can create wonders when duly treated, and can resemble almost all you can imagine. When painting, keep in mind the imaginary surroundings of the set. Is it cold, rainy, or sunny out there? Weather and time always affect structures in some particular way. So cars, if you're driving around in the desert, if you're driving around in the dirt, if you're driving around in the cold snow, are going to have residue of those things, and it's going to have a little bit of weathering because of it. Same thing with buildings and anything else that's outside in those elements. So keep that in mind as you're making a miniature set. They say no need to make a perfect replica for everything. A lot of stuff can actually be printed out on paper and posted on a wall or put on the floor, for example, like rugs, curtains, and etc. It's because you're not really going to be paying attention to most of that. The main thing that you want is just to make it look like it's a room, not just have everything be perfectly in focus so that they can look at every single thing in that room. Check for possible repetitive patterns like bricks on the wall. You can create a master cast for them and then mold a needed number of copies. So a brick wall, it's going to look the same. Every brick is going to look pretty similar. So they're saying, go ahead and just make one and then copy it 100 times instead of cutting out and carving out 100 different bricks, because that's just going to take way more time than needed. Construct the set of detachable sections so that you can easily rebuild it elsewhere or make changes on the go. So try not to construct it in one giant piece. If you can, try to do it in pieces so you can put it all together and it looks like one piece, but it can actually be taken apart if you need to bring it somewhere else, especially if it's a pretty big size where it's like they said, 1/4 or 1/6, because that's still going to be pretty big if you're doing like a car. It's just going to be a lot smaller than the real thing. If you're combining your set with a real life background and objects, the bigger issue, apart from preserving the proportions and maintaining correct perspective, is to have all you need in focus. Otherwise, the trick won't work. Therefore, make sure your set is properly lit and the real life objects are lit in a similar manner. You'll have to close the iris as much as possible to make things appear in focus as if they were close to each other, even though in reality, they can be really far away. If you intend on blowing your set up, make sure to prepare chunks of the structure that are going to appear after the explosion and make it look more credible. bring some considerable disorder to the interior, fill it with dust and debris. Once the design of the pre-destroyed interior is finished, cover it up with the intact facade. So make a destructible version and then make it look like it's not destroyed on top of that. That way, when you destroy it, it's already all over the place and spread out and already looks realistic, as well as the actual piece blowing up. HD has set new standards to the detailization of the models. It was easier to get away with before with grain and lower resolutions, but beware of having too many details on a prop that is supposed to serve as a distant background. Nothing gives a model away as much as this. So make sure you keep in mind how far away those things are supposed to be and how much in focus everything is supposed to be. Don't make things too detailed if they're supposed to be 17 miles away. You know, make it realistic. That mountain in the background that's supposed to be like 10 miles away, it doesn't need to have every single detail on it because the sky, the air and the chemicals and everything in the air are going to make it look a little blurred out. It's not going to be as detailed until you get closer to it. So if it's supposed to be far away, don't make the miniature too detailed of the mountain. Otherwise, it won't look realistic. All right, going back to miniature, they say, shoot with a wide angle lens with the miniature closer to the camera to make them appear larger. Pay attention to the depth of field. You normally want your aperture closed down as much as possible, which will mean you'll need more light. So that was the other thing. Everybody's saying the same thing about wide angle lens and closing down your aperture to make sure it's as small as possible so it's as much in focus as possible. But because of that, you also need a lot more light to make it look the same in camera as it would otherwise, because it's going to be, the iris is going to be a lot more closed down. So it's not going to be letting as much light in. So you have to put more light on the thing to make up for that, to make it look the way you need it to. So you also want to keep that in mind. So light, I think, is very hard with miniatures because on the one hand, like I said, you don't want to make it too bright. You don't want to make something too bright to the point where it obviously looks like it's a flashlight inside of a little building you made, but you also can't keep it too dark to the point where the camera's not going to pick it up because the camera is going to be looking a lot darker. So you have to have a lot more light for the overall scene. So it's a really difficult balance to achieve, but if you can get it right, lighting will really make it believable. They say shoot at a higher frame rate when possible. That's for the smoothness of it. You don't want it to look too.
I also think that depending on the light, it can also show a lot of flaws. So yeah, it is very tricky.
You want it to try to be smooth if you can, because it's supposed to be stuff that's farther away than in reality it is. So when you normally don't want it to be too smooth because it looks unrealistic, for a miniature, if you're moving your camera towards a mountain, that mountain is going to stay the same amount of smoothness. It's not going to be, it's not going to have that blur effect because it's still so far away. It doesn't matter how much you're recording it as you walk closer to it, compared to if you are walking by somebody that's waving their hand, then you're going to see some motion blur. But if you're shooting a miniature, obviously, if you're going closer to the mountain with your camera, you're actually getting really close to that miniature really quickly compared to how you would in real life when you're shooting a real mountain that's miles away. So because of that, you want to try to shoot at a higher frame rate, and that way it looks smoother than it normally would. But then again, that is also going to take away light because now your camera's basically, the iris is down as low as it can be and it's blinking a bunch. You know, the frame rate is making it, the shutter speed be really high. And so it's basically the camera's blinking a lot and it has its eye mostly closed. So even less light's coming in because of that. And you need to keep that in mind as well. All right, let's see. So for scale, the main scales are 1/6 scale, which is around this size if you were doing a tank, 1/12 scale, and 1/24 scale. I couldn't find a tank of a 1/24 scale, but basically you could hold it in your hand. And with the bigger version, you have to carry it with both hands. And with the 1/6 scale, it's going to be kind of like a mini tank that maybe a child could sit on, and it would look like a little toy that they would ride on. Whatever scale you choose, be sure all elements match that scale. You don't want a 1/6 scale of a model car and a 1/12 scale city, or it looks huge. Keep everything proportionate. If you have one, you may want to shoot with a macro lens. Those are for very close things. Some people like to shoot bugs and stuff like that. Macro lenses are very good for that kind of stuff. So if you have one, miniatures is where you would want to use it. When doing camera angles and movement, think of your scale. If in the real shot, your camera would be 6 feet off the ground looking down, a scaled miniature at 1/6 would need the camera 1 foot off the ground for the same look. Because now it's going to look like it's 6 feet above ground because all your miniatures are six times smaller. They're 1/6 the size of the real thing. So you have to scale down all of your, like I was saying earlier, you have to scale down all of your camera angles in the movement. You have to go 1/6 as fast when moving the camera if you want to get a certain movement. The real movement you would do, you have to scale that down to 1/6 as fast as you would normally do it. That way it'll look the same on the miniature. And that way the camera movements will be slower and they'll feel similar to the speeds they would be at the full size movement. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything to add about miniature sets, miniature models? Also, we're talking mostly about miniature sets. Some miniature models are made. We already talked about that earlier in this semester, where a production designer will make it just to show off like what the real set will look like. And that'll normally be something more like this, like a 1/24 scale or something, where there's like, this is what the room will look like. Is that good? And then they get approved for it or not. But then you can also shoot the miniatures depending on how much detail you have. And a lot of films will do this. And that way you can have realistic effects, practical effects on a budget. And you can make a location that you otherwise would never be able to either find or would be able to shoot at because it would be too expensive to go out to wherever you're trying to shoot. Now, if you're doing something like this and you're trying to shoot it in a snowstorm, you're trying to shoot it in a mountain area, you can't just go to a national park and shoot it because there's a lot of permits and stuff you have to go through. You have to travel there. So doing it on a miniature, if you can get it right, you can do the whole thing in your house or in a garage or, something like that. So it's a lot easier to get it on a budget, but it's a lot harder to get it done right because it takes a lot more finesse and like just patience to get everything to look the way it should. And it takes some math to scale everything down and make sure that you're scaling down your camera movement and camera angles as well. But if you get it right, you can make some really cool shots that aren't that expensive.
Yeah, you had brought up, because macro lenses, I had mentioned that several meetings ago. I don't know what meeting we were talking about lenses, but for people that don't know what they are, they're like, well, obviously they're used to shoot small objects, But the issue is that normal lenses are too large to capture like really small things in fine detail, because it's just something about the depth of field that the lenses have. So they've made lenses that are designated to they're very narrow looking lenses, and they're dedicated to capturing smaller objects. But if you don't have a macro lens, because I believe they can get kind of expensive, there's another way you can kind of get kind of results. It's like a filter you can put on the front of your lens. It's like a magnifying glass, and a lot of people use it to get really extreme close-ups, like a penny, like you wouldn't be able to capture a penny in a full frame on a full frame sensor with a full lens. Like, you wouldn't be able to do it no matter how close you got the camera. You would either need a macro lens or I don't necessarily know what it's called, but it's a piece of glass you put on top of your lens. It's literally a magnifying glass that blows everything up. So that's one way of doing it without having. It's not exactly the same, but like if you're trying to get like, really small objects and you want to fill your screen up with really small objects, you would get that piece of glass to kind of make up for it.
I'll look it up and I'll figure out what it is. That sounds cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there it is. There's the macro lens. It's a little narrow looking lens that they use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the way it can move in really close to stuff and get that perspective and make everything look larger. Oh, Vish said extenders. Is that what it's called?
I'm not necessarily sure. It's been a while. Let's
see, lens. Something like that.
Oh no, those are I think those have something more or less to do with the frame of the sensor for the vignetting.
I'm just saying, like, magnifying glass. Well, I'll look it up after the meeting, and I'll see it. I'll bring it up next meeting.
Yeah,
it sounds interesting to make to shoot miniatures. Do you know how much they are?
Yeah, they vary in price. Makes
sense.
They're not too expensive.
Cool. But yeah, like I said, miniatures are really cool. And sometimes you can do miniatures that are big like this. You just don't get the actual real thing. And that way you can make a set, or you can make a set piece that you otherwise wouldn't be able to obtain, like an actual tank. Or making a life-size tank would be hard, but making a miniature that's mostly the size you're going for, it will help as well. The bigger you can make the miniature, the more detail you have to put into it. But if you're able to get that detail and you're able to make it look realistic, the less of a problem having that, either not having a macro lens or not having the right kind of equipment will be, because now it's more like the actual life-size version of it. So that's also something you can keep in mind when you're going to go one way or the other with miniatures. You're either going to make them as big as you can, or you're going to make them pretty small, so you're just doing like an overall scene. It also depends on what you're shooting. If you're trying to shoot an outdoor scene and you're trying to do like a fantasy film where you're doing a new location, it might be better to do like a 1/12 or a 1/24 scale version, so you can just do basically what looks like a helicopter shot. Whereas if you're trying to shoot something like a small street or one thing like a tank, you might want to make a bigger version and put more detail into it so that you can pass it off as a real thing. However much focus is going to be going into it, and how long it's going to stay on camera will really determine how large you should make it and how much detail it should have. All right, this stuff, next we're talking about TV ratings and viewership. We've talked about this somewhat, but we'll get a little more in depth into it. This stuff comes from entertainment.howstuffworks.com. It's letter B in the syllabus, right there. All right, a company known as Nielsen Media Research is the de facto national measurement for the TV industry. Nielsen measures the number of people watching TV shows and makes its data available to TV and cable networks, advertisers, and the media.
They also measure radio statistics and, different stuff as well. They're pretty big on analytics.
Yeah, very research heavy. Nielsen uses statistical sampling by recruiting people to join its TV ratings panels and measures what they watch, how often they watch it, and for how long they watch it. They sample around 20,000 households as representatives of larger groups and the nation as a whole with viewing habits. So gender, income, ethnicity, and more are considered for the selection. The company measures live, DVR, on-demand, and recently streamed content. April 2021, it launched Nielsen streaming video ratings, but that doesn't count viewers not in the US. And the streaming metrics only measure what people watch on televisions. So on their phone or on the computer, they don't count that, or they're not able to measure that right now. So they're falling behind a bit. Even though there is more of a shift towards streaming on phones, tablets, laptops, computers, and other devices, which could make traditional methods for TV ratings outdated, currently, TV research is still worth billions of dollars, and many networks still use these ratings and research to decide which shows get renewed or canceled. According to talkwalker.com, which is letter C in the syllabus, as of September 9th, 2020, consumers in most major markets except China still consume more live TV than streamed content. So I think I actually have a picture of that. Yeah.
It's mostly to do with the majority of the generation being older, and so they're still used to TV. So they do have theories that it is probably going to change over the years, but for right now, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely shifting, which is why people are saying that TV, live TV is dead, live TV is dying. It is, but those things take time when they were the main thing.
For multiple generations, yeah.
Yeah. So the dark green in these pictures shows streaming video, the average weekly video content consumption in hours among total consumers. And so it shows that, they watch in China, they watch maybe 17 hours of weekly streamed content compared to 15 hours of live broadcast content. In the UK, it's 8 to 16. So they're still watching double the amount of live TV as they are streaming. Brazil, starting to catch up, 20 hours compared to 17 for streaming. France, they watch mostly live, it looks like 22 hours of live with 7 hours of streaming.
A lot of these countries, there's also the factor of they don't have as many streaming services as the US. Most of the things that are on other streaming services here in the US are mainly on Netflix and Amazon Prime. In other countries, I can only speak for the ones that I've lived in, but they're very different. And I've heard from people that I know that live in the UK the same thing, that they don't have, for example, like they don't have Disney Plus, or they didn't have Disney Plus until very recently. I don't know if that changed recently or not, but I know that was a huge factor. And that, I believe, still plays a huge factor as well in the fact that they don't watch as much streaming because it's not available as much, and most of the material is still in cable networks or paid services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can see like even in the US right now, 23 hours of, this is from 2018, but it's only a few years ago. 23 hours live broadcast, 15 hours stream. So live broadcast is still winning in the US, at least according to this survey from 2018. I'm pretty sure it's still happening that way, where it's, it's probably a little more even, but I don't think streaming has overtaken it yet. In Japan, it's 27 hours of live broadcast to 8 hours of streaming. So Japan and France, they still stream. I mean, they watch live broadcasts way more than they stream. UK, double the amount of live broadcasts as they stream. In the other countries, they're a little more even. So we might have some years to go before it shifts fully to streaming, and even more before we might see live TV go away entirely, if that even happens at all. So don't discount it just because it's not that. They also show some other data that's interesting from an advertiser's perspective. So this is global marketing budgets in 2020. So for marketing in things, the value above 50 indicates that the market for budgeting is growing. The marketing budget, is growing in that industry. And a value under 50 means that it's declining. So this is showing month to month from 2020. From January, it's dark blue. February, it's light blue. March, it's light green. And April is pink. Obviously, 2020 marks when COVID happened. So March and April, you can start to see that everything goes down and how much it's giving to the marketing budget. And that's because there wasn't as much stuff to market, because not as much stuff could be marketed because everything had to shut down. But in January and February, you can see that in digital, like mobile advertising and things like that, the marketing was growing. It was about like 60 for both months. And as well as mobile. Oh, sorry. So that's excluding mobile. Digital is like computer ads, website ads, things like that. Whereas mobile is obviously on the phone. And those two sometimes go hand in hand, and sometimes they market specifically to mobile only. It just depends. For TV, like live TV, it was below 50. So it was on the decline before March even hit. And then, of course, it dipped really hard down in April and beyond because of COVID. Radio is on a huge decline already. I don't know what OOH is. And then press, like magazines and things like that, was on a very large decline for marketing budgets. So you can see that mobile and digital and, basically the internet is growing, while everything else, every other form of like advertising, is given less and less money to market to because there's less people watching it. More people are shifting over, and that's why more money is shifting over to those as well. They also have total video minutes per person per day that are adults from 16 to 34 on all devices 2018. And it shows that the total is about 4 hours and 30 minutes that the average person is on these devices a day. Live TV has a pretty large chunk of it. YouTube is catching up to live TV, honestly. Console games, it's pretty big. SVOD, that'd be like subscription-based video on demand. Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, that has 52%. Actually, I don't know if this is percent. I don't really know what this is, what the numbers are. But you can look at the circle and see the chunk that's taken out of the entire 4 hours and 30 minutes. Live TV is still a huge chunk. So it's still being viewed a lot. And that's why especially whenever you do something big, some big event, sports, the Super Bowl. You know, that's the biggest thing that everybody watches. I think that's the most watched thing each year. And that's why those ads cost millions of dollars, because they have so many millions of people watching at that time. So it's not like it's completely gone. You know, I've heard a lot of people say that, a lot of new independent filmmakers and things like that have said like, oh, I don't want to get on broadcast TV or cable TV because then nobody's going to watch it. That's not entirely true. There's still a lot of people watching it, but it does depend on your audience, I would say. Younger people are shifting over to YouTube and subscription-based video on demand.
On like your age group of your demographic, the type of your demographic, and the time slot that you can get as well, because it shows that millennials and older people are the ones that watch more prime time, so to speak. And then apparently there's also an animal study that showed like, oh, these are the times that this generation will watch more. These are the channels and types of, not even channels, but even like the genres that they will actually watch cable for. So there's also that too. Consider.
And then there was this, which I don't know if it's gonna, oh yeah. This was, another reason why a lot of advertisers and marketers still go for TV ads is because when you do a survey asking people how much they trust different sources for their information, their ads, how much they trust an ad shown in these different sources, a lot of people will have different answers, of course, but if you look at this, you can see that depending on what source is saying the information depends on how much people are going to trust it. They either don't know if it's dark blue or they don't trust it if it's gray. Websites, apps of online news organizations like BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and stuff like that, 28% trust, 47% don't really know, 25% do not trust. So website advertising is still kind of like one of the lower ones because, you know, there's anybody can post online. So that's why.
Honestly, I can speak to that. Whenever I see an ad on YouTube to this day, like, I don't know if I can, like, if it's something I haven't seen before, I don't know if I can 100% trust it, or if it's just, oh, someone paid for an ad. And that's because the same way you see like big company ads on YouTube, you also see these like really crappy companies that you know are crappy, or these companies that have like robot voiceovers and you're like, yeah, what the heck is this? Or these just straight up scam companies too. So yeah, I have seen everything. I've seen like big commercials, and I've seen like new up and coming companies that are just trying to make a name for themselves. And I've seen obvious scams that I've later watched even YouTube videos about, talking about how bad it is while YouTube is recommending me that, or like putting that commercial in the person's video. So
hey, you on the couch there.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop sitting there and subscribe to my channel, make money.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It is really funny how you're watching a video about, hey, this is a scam, and it's all over the internet, and then the exact commercial for that thing that they're trash talking will appear in their ads
because it has the word that they advertise to. Yeah, because they market it to people who are saying, you know, hair curler, and then somebody's having a review of how bad this hair curler is. But you typed in hair curler, so that ad's gonna pop up.
Yeah, so it is a very flawed system.
So on that, like because of that, for just like YouTube and things like that, people don't trust those ads as much as they do from like BBC TV, ITV. You can see the trust is like 69, 73%. So people trust those ads more, so they're more willing to buy the product and believe, oh, this is an actual legitimate company. It's not just some random startup company that wants to advertise to YouTube, make a few $1 million, and then get a bunch of claims, but disappear. Because so some do that. So that's another reason why marketers and advertisers still like to, when they can, do more TV ads and things like that. But again, they really segregate their marketing to different target markets of different age groups, different ethnicities, different just locations and nationalities and everything else, depending on who they think might like whatever product or whatever show they're trying to sell. And so that'll really determine where they advertise to, but they'll usually do a mixture of different advertisements to different things. So they might do online ads and they'll put a certain amount of their budget to that. And then they'll do television ads and they'll do a certain amount of their budget to that. And they'll determine how much of their budget goes to each based on who they think is watching those things or going to those websites or wherever they're trying to advertise to, and break down their budget that way to make sure that they are reaching as many people as they can that they believe will be interested in their product or in their show or movie. And then there was this daily broadcast TV ratings, and it was showing adults from 18 to 49. And 8 p.m., it shows that there's like 9 million viewers on CBS, ABC, different shows. NCIS has 9.4 million viewers. To Tell the Truth on ABC, 3.7 million viewers. Resident Fox, 3.2 million viewers.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about, how it depends on the time and the day of the week.
Yeah.
How many viewers they get and the demographics as well.
9 p.m., This Is Us, NBC, for almost 5 million viewers. FBI on CBS, 7.5 million viewers. Blackish on ABC, 2.5 million viewers. And so Nielsen will record this kind of data with their sample, and then they'll extrapolate that and make a estimated guess based on the sample that they took, and basically apply that to the nation as a whole and say, this is about how many people are watching this show. And they only count certain ones for how long they're watching it and whatever else. And they sell that information to the networks. And that's why they're still able to do this, because that information is very important to the network so that they know. And for the advertisers, Nielsen also gives that information out to the advertisers so they can know, which shows are popular and why do I need to pay extra money to list it for This Is Us than I do for Prodigal Son on Fox. And then Nielsen and the network goes, well, this is why. Nielsen says that we have 5 million people watching, and the other one has 2 million. So, we have 3 million more than double. So you have to pay us more than double the price, or something like that. So the data is still really important, and live TV is still really important. And there's still a lot of people watching it, even though it's declining slowly but surely ever since streaming and other things started taking off. Even when DVR started taking off, Nielsen didn't immediately record that information. Now I think it's like if you watch it within the first 7 days or something like that, they'll record it and count that. But before, when it first came out, they only counted when people watched it live. So everyone who watched it recorded it and watched it later weren't counted. And because of that, there's larger audiences for the show, but it gets canceled anyway because the data is looking like there's not as many people watching it. And that can be a problem, especially whenever they can't record people watching it on their phone or on the computers right now for streaming services. It's harder for streaming services to trust the data from these because they're not counting all of the data. And it's really hard for everything to keep track of what is being watched, when it's being watched, and how long it's being watched. But with streaming services, they have stuff built in that can kind of record that information. And so they kind of have their own system to do it and don't have to rely on a third-party company as much. But with live television, they're still using Nielsen as a reference point. see. But yeah, so all that stuff, it shows why live TV is still relevant and why ratings and viewership matter. It's all about the money that the advertisers are willing to pay. And if that makes the network money compared to how much it costs to make that television show, then they'll keep making it. But if it's costing more to make the show than what they're making in ad revenue, they'll cancel it. And if it's projected that the show is going to grow or that it has an audience that's larger than what they had the first season or the second season or whatever it is, then they might be more determined to keep it going because they believe that there's going to be more ad revenue coming in later. There's going to be more viewership later. And if it doesn't happen, they cancel it the next season. Networks normally do their cancellations or renewals around May because that's around the time they're pitching the ratings to advertisers to see how much the advertisers are willing to pay to advertise during those time slots. With streaming services, they are often looking at different metrics, but many of them tend to see how many subscribers come in when a show is released and how many current subscribers watch it within a certain time frame after its release. So for Netflix, for example, a lot of people won't find shows. What a lot of people complain about with Netflix and the other streaming services is that sometimes they don't advertise their stuff enough. So they don't advertise a show or a new
You're being
season
generous when you say sometimes, because that is a constant issue that a lot of people complain about.
Yeah, and so like there will be an audience for the content. They just won't know it's out there. And because of that, they don't watch it. And so then the streaming service thinks, oh, nobody cares about this, when really they just didn't advertise it right. So it's a little bit of a mixture of those two things when it comes to streaming services, which is why it's hard to have a show on a streaming service that lasts many seasons. It's because unless it's doing really well, like Stranger Things or something, one of their like mega shows that they're blasting out there, Stranger Things, The Boys, those kinds of things, then they don't really mention it as much. They don't advertise it as much. So it's harder to find. And because of that, even if you like that kind of stuff, or even if you watch the first season, if they don't tell you the second season is out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's very frustrating to a lot of people. They get invested, they wait, and then the second season comes. And we had an experience with that. We watched the first season of a show, and we found out a few days ago that the second season came out in April, and we weren't notified about it. And it's ridiculous. And a lot of people complain about that because a lot of departments suffer because they don't advertise it well, they don't do a good job, and then the production company suffers, the people who make it suffer. And a lot of it is because they have way too many shows and they're stretched very thin. But a lot of it is also because they are trying so much to get new viewers and throw money at new projects and differentiate their products to get different kinds of viewers, that they, unless something is like a huge ginormous success like the Stranger Things situation, they won't advertise it as much. I was talking, I think I mentioned in a few meetings ago that the animation department at Netflix was basically cut completely. If not, a lot of them, like their budget was cut, and a lot of them walked out. A lot of them quit because their shows weren't being advertised. They were not the conditions that they had to work were not as good. And at the end of the day, the creators are the ones that suffer. It is a new system. It is hard.
It is hard to just get. It's hard for that because of the way television used to work and now the way that it works now. Because now it is, we'll get into this later actually, but I'm just going to mention this real quick. So streaming services are paying, if they are originals, they are paying for the production. And so then they're also going to be paying for the advertising. And in a network situation, you have the studio that makes the thing. So they're the ones that are getting funding from the network, maybe not complete funding though, for the project. And then they're making it, delivering it to the network. And the network is then advertising the show. So the network is still paying most of it, but it's not paying as much. And it's not all on the network as much as it is now on like streaming services. On streaming services, it costs more. And also they're paying more because they want to draw in more subscribers. And so then they don't pay as much in advertising. And yeah, I think it's starting to come, you know.
Yeah, they're trying to figure it out because it's a new system. And so they're still trying to figure out, okay, how much do we put for this department? How many people do we need? How much money do we need to put for it? How do we distribute? Because it's not like how do we advertise these new shows? Where to advertise them? How much of each show to advertise? Because let's be honest, these streaming services have way more on their roster than a typical cable network would have. Like normally a cable network has a few shows for every time slot, but they have way more than that. So that's also why it's hard. Like, okay, how are we going to just to advertise for every single thing that we have?
Yeah, because you can see reruns on a network, but on a streaming service, if it's not a new show, I mean, people might watch it again, but they want to see new stuff. So it is a bit different when it comes to that. But since we're talking mostly about like ratings and viewership, it's just about the difference in how they treat those things, how they look at ratings and how they look at viewership. And right now, networks and studios and stuff that are doing broadcast TV or cable TV are still looking at the Nielsen ratings and the viewership through those sampling numbers. They're buying the information from them so that they can figure out what's going to be, still on the air, what's not, what are they going to cancel, as they are talking to the advertisers to see how much you guys are willing to pay to put your commercial in between this new show we have. And here are the numbers of people watching, and here's how often they watch it, and blah, 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 blah. And then they come to some agreements. But with streaming services, because they are constantly releasing, with networks, they have more of a scheduled release pitch. They get pitched ideas, they decide on those ideas, they do that. We talked about all this. And then, like I said, they do their cancellations or their renewals around May, because that's when advertisers are looking to meet with them and discuss what they're going to be paying to advertise on in their time slots. So they're on more of like a yearly schedule with different seasons of, this is now pitching season, and this is now we're talking about advertising, and now we're talking about this and that and this. Whereas a streaming service, they're like year round. So their shows can be canceled or renewed at various times and points in the year, just depending on when it comes out. They're typically trying to keep content coming in throughout the year. So they want to have different content at various stages of production so that they can release week to week to week or month to month something really big, or every few months something really big, to keep people subscribed because they're a subscription service. Some shows get multi-seasons greenlit. Others don't know if they'll be renewed or not until after the season is completed, or they're already developing the next season and they don't know if it's going to be greenlit. They're just kind of making the scripts and stuff like that. Some shows get renewed for a final season, which means that they're canceled, but they have one more season to wrap things up. So sometimes the network will give them that option. That way they can make an ending, pretty much. According to wired.co.uk, which is letter I in the syllabus, Netflix looks at 3 metrics mainly when deciding to continue or cancel a show. All have to do with the cost to viewership. Are there enough people watching to justify the cost of this show. 2 data points at the first 7 days of the show's season. Once it releases, the first 7 days, there's 2 data points they look at. And the first 28 days. So the first is starters. We call it starters. It's households that watch just 1 episode of the series. So they started the show. They're starters. They started it, didn't watch another one within that time frame, 7 days or 28 days. The second is completers, or households that finish an entire season. So within the first 7 days, they finished this season. And the final metric is watchers, the total number of subscribers that watch a show. So they have starters, who started this, they have completers, who completed the actual season, and watchers, just how many people watched it at any length. That's within the first 7 days or 28 days. The 28-day metric is mainly used for if people watch the whole season by then. And the 7-day metric is if at least 1 episode has been watched. So they want, so whenever Netflix or, another company, streaming services all pretty much work the same. So they look at very short time frames from when it's released, which is why, again, there's usually a larger audience for these shows than what these streaming services are counting. Because sometimes somebody wants to watch 3 different shows and they released, one released last month, but they've been busy. They went on vacation. And so they're catching up on that season. And then they're going to watch the new season of this new show that just came out 6 days ago, but they can't watch it tomorrow. So they're going to watch it next week. And whatever stuff comes up, they don't watch the whole season by 28 days. Now the streaming service looks at them as like, they didn't really care about the show that much, and it sucks, but that's just the way it is. That's just the way they look at it.
There's also the major flaw that people weren't taking into account the situation with COVID. A lot of programs are like, man, they have this many views. And then they dropped because, of course they would, because people, went back to their day-to-day lives and normal everyday activities. And instead of taking that into consideration, which I understand it is hard, because you're like, okay, how do we measure what was the metric of people that just had more time and what was the metric of people that were just interested? It is harder than, just, it's probably this. But that was also a huge factor. And it is making it a lot harder to detransition and for people to, for companies especially, to look at it and be like, okay, what is actual interest compared to, people just had a lot more free time.
Yeah. And so it's very hard for them to nail down what to count, what not to count. But realistically speaking, if you're not watching the show within the first month, I don't know about the whole season. I think that's kind of ridiculous.
Well, it depends on the advertising, because we took 2 months to watch our show.
Right. So, that's, I don't know about that, but I do know, if your show isn't bringing in a lot of people, then it doesn't really feel like that many people care about it. Same thing with movies. When a film comes out, if people aren't going to the theaters to watch it, but they're going to go 3 weeks from now, it doesn't matter as much at that point, because the theaters don't really want to keep the movie. It's not performing well. Everybody's planning to do it 3 weeks from now. Well, a lot of theaters are going to kick it out before then because it's not getting anybody to watch it now. So that's the same way streaming services work with television shows. And which is why if you really like a show, you should probably watch it quickly, even though that really sucks. Some people don't like doing that, but I for one, don't really like watching it all at once when I can, I don't know, if it's a really long show, it's just like, I'll watch it in pieces, but apparently, you need to watch it really quickly. Also, Netflix doesn't commission a pilot episode. This is another reason why it's really expensive for streaming services. They do entire seasons at once. So this makes it much more expensive and risky.
Not all. That is also changing a little bit, but Netflix still does, and a few other networks do as well. But that is also something that I've been seeing changing a lot more, because they've been noticing that that engagement is a lot higher with weekly releases. That people are actually interested longer. People are talking about it longer.
But the thing is, they don't. But a pilot episode is a network would order a pilot episode, test it to an audience, see if they like it, and then order the season, or order multiple episodes, and then do it however much they have trust in that pilot. But for Netflix and other streaming services, correct me if I'm wrong, but what they do is they order the entire season. They might distribute it weekly, but they have that entire season filmed and ready to go. They don't do a pilot episode, see if people like it on their streaming service, and then go, okay, a year from now, we're going to have the rest of those episodes for you.
So here's my theory, right?
All right.
I think, and this is probably not going to be the same because of what you said. Like streaming services, yeah, I don't think there's a way of releasing it. But the whole process in syndication is they will have a pilot, they will do test screenings, they'll see if it's any good, and then they'll approve it of releasing it. I think that they will do much more of a method like Disney did with a few of their shows, where they will order the first 2 or 3 episodes and see how it works with that, and if they're going to put it on their platform or not. And with that, with how those 2 or 3 episodes go, they will release it like that, like they've been releasing recently, which I've seen a lot of platforms do that, where they'll release the first few episodes just to get you engaged, because the first episode doesn't really give you much. More often than not, it's just a framework for everything, a build up, and then they will release the rest weekly. I think, this is my theory, that this might be where we're heading
for development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it would make more sense because right now it's costing so much because they're ordering the entire season. They're getting it made, so they're paying for the production, and then they are releasing it however they want. They might release it all at once, like Netflix. You can watch the whole season right away, or you can watch it in pieces, or like Amazon or HBO Max, or some of the other ones I've been doing is like releasing, like Priscilla said, 2 or 3 episodes, or maybe just 1, and then releasing it on a weekly schedule after that. Oh, Disney Plus, that's the other one. Mm-hmm. But they still order the whole show right now. So that's still the problem with it, is they're not doing that same. It's a lot less expensive to order 1 episode, see if people are interested in that show.
Well, honey, back then it wasn't exactly like that as much either. Like, yeah, they would have more time for development because they would have like hiatuses and stuff, but they still had to see if the audience was interested before they released it, and they would have a few episodes lined up. It wouldn't just be, the first episode. That's why a lot of shows,
that's what pilot episodes are. Pilot episodes are for them to test the waters on this show.
But I'm talking about when it goes out to syndication, when it goes out on services and stuff.
Not all the time. It depends on what it is.
No, I'm not saying like not all the time, but I'm saying that a lot of shows, more often than not, they won't have just like 1 episode. Even back then, they would have ordered at least a few. That's why there was the Firefly issue where they aired out of syndication, but they also only had a few episodes made. There were a few other shows where they only had a few episodes made.
But the pilot episode is mainly for the network to see if it's good, to test it on audiences, to see if they like it and are interacting with it well, and then deciding if they want to make more episodes. With streaming services, they don't have right now a platform to do that. If they're releasing a pilot episode, it's because they have the whole season filmed or planning to be filmed already. Usually they have it all filmed.
But that's not a sustainable system. So I don't know. I just think that maybe they might.
Well, that's how it works. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying how it works.
Oh no. I'm just saying that I don't think it's going to work like that for much longer, because I feel like this was a very relatively new thing, and I feel like the more that they are seeing the patterns and the more that they're seeing what people actually respond to, the more that's going to change and become a lot more similar to how syndication is now.
We'll see. Right now, this is how it works. And this is why networks are able to give chances to different things and why they're not canceling shows as fast as streaming services do. We'll see if that changes it. Hopefully it does. But right now, that's just how it works. So Netflix also uses what's called a cost plus model, which means it pays a show's entire production costs plus 30% premium on top of that to the producers or the production for them to just have money for making it. So it gets expensive to do that, which is why, again, why Netflix cancels so many things. But what traditional networks normally do is, as you can see in this, they pay a portion of production costs, then get the production company to fork up the rest. Since the show can have international distribution, it can go on other broadcasters and streaming services, and it can continue to make money for the production company. The production company was actually the one that, in a network situation, in a stream, broadcast TV and things like that, the studio or the network, or the studio or the production company that's making the show own the rights to it. The network are paying them to show it on their channels. So it allows the studio to then later sell the reruns to the same network or to a different network. It allows them to sell it to streaming services and make different deals. But they're the ones, that's why they're the ones who have to fork up a lot of the production budget, because they're going to be making money off of this show if it does well for years, for, you know, Friends and Seinfeld and all these shows that are big and have, you know, are very well known, make tons of money even from reruns and stuff like that. So the production company and the studio that made it can still make a lot of money from each time it shows on a new network or it shows to a different streaming service. And when that streaming service deal ends, now they can sell it to a different one for a lot of money. And it just keeps happening because they're the ones who own it. The network doesn't. With a streaming service, the streaming service owns it. And that's why you don't see Netflix originals going to other streaming services, at least not really. So Netflix gives bonuses and pay bumps to producers the longer their shows go on, which is another reason they cancel, because this makes costs increase each season. And that's why a lot of shows get canceled after 2 seasons, because the costs just keep going up, because they keep giving pay bumps and increases and bonuses to the producers, to the crew, the actors, for the show to keep going. They did this because they wanted to have a really lucrative, not lucrative, they wanted to have a really incentivize people to get on their platform. And it worked. But now, like Priscilla said, it seems unsustainable because it's just, well, it is. They keep canceling shows because it's unsustainable, because you can't just keep paying increased costs for a show that's getting the same amount of viewers. And that's why a lot of them are canceled, unless it's raking in, you know, let's say they give a pay bump of 10%. Well, now they need 10% more viewers or subscribers for it to justify the extra costs. 3 seasons from now, if they keep doing it 10% each season, it's 40% more than it was from the first season, because the first season came out 3 seasons later, 4 seasons total, 40% increase on everybody's pay. And that's why you'll see not many shows make it past 2 seasons on Netflix. Now, I don't know how the other streaming services work exactly with their pay, but I don't think it's as good of a deal as that for Netflix. If you have a show that stays on Netflix, you're gonna make a lot of money. If it's on Amazon or if it's on HBO, I'm pretty sure it's still really good, but I don't know if they pay as they do the same metrics of pay as Netflix does. So, but on networks, shows with 3 seasons have a better chance of making it to season 5 than a show making it to season 2 from season 1. That's because of syndication, which is either selling the rights to air episodes to another network or rerunning them on the same network at non-primetime hours for more ad revenue. The reason why it has a better chance of making it after 3 seasons going all the way to 5 seasons is because there's more episodes. They have more episodes to sell, they have more episodes to rerun, and it's just on the network longer. So the more people are watching it and, oh, what is this show? I've never seen it. All of that. So after a show on a network gets past a certain amount of seasons, they have a good, that's why these can last for like 15 seasons and stuff, because it's more wide known. It has 100+ episodes that you can keep airing and selling to other networks and making money off of it from then on. And so it makes the cost to make a new season cheaper, or at least more justified than getting from season 1 to season 2. Because season 1, you might have 10 to 24 episodes. So you don't really have that much to sell to another network or to rerun. You can't rerun the same 5 best episodes over and over again too many times, or people will get sick of it and stop watching your network, your channel. So yeah, that's why on networks they cancel shows after like season 1 or season 2, because it's just not bringing in enough people. There's not enough interest there. But if it has multiple seasons, even if the views are declining or they're stagnant, they'll allow it to keep going because they can still make money from it with syndication. And another thing, you could sell it to streaming services, show it on Hulu and all of those things that'll pay a certain amount to show it on their service. And so the more seasons you have, the more money you get from doing that. Does anyone have any questions, comments, anything to add about TV ratings and viewership?
I do. I have a point. So I watched Will Smith, Prince of Bel-Air, and so I noticed that it's like he only gets more viewerships. Like it's so constant. Like that part of it. Like I forgot what it's called. Like royalty. Like you get paid with with reruns.
Yeah. Royalty.
Yeah, royalty.
Yeah.
Do you think more advertisers I would trust, but they're more expensive, like to advertise with these sitcoms that's on repeat.
So they don't pay as much for that because they're not at primetime hours.
Oh, all right.
Primetime hours are usually the new shows, and they're trying to see what is getting the most views. They put reruns in, the after hours or before, or when people are at work. So there's already not going to be as many people watching it. But they will pay more for, depending on what the show is and how many views it gets. It all comes down to the viewership numbers.
Oh, okay.
And that'll depend on how much it's willing to, how much that show is worth. Those time slots, you have 3 time slots or something, 4 time slots for commercials. And this show that's going to get 500,000 views, it's going to be a lot less money to them than it is for this really popular show that has a rerun that's getting 2 million views or 7 million views. Probably not 7 million, but 2 million, 1.5 million. 3 times the amount of people watching that one, they're going to have a better chance of getting more money.
Mm-hmm.
And then the royalties, all that stuff is determined through the studio, the one who made it. So they're actually making all those deals with the actors and everything like that. That's not really the network's thing or concern, because the pay goes back to the studio, because they're the ones, charging a bunch of it. The network pays a fee to allow them to show all of the season, and the studio are the ones who make all the contracts and everything with the actors and the crew. So if the actors have that royalty stuff, it's going to be based on whatever the studio gave, whatever deal they gave them.
Oh, okay.
And usually, like later on in the seasons, the actors can start being like, hey, if they're a main one, they can demand better deals because they're more important to the show now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the people in Friends, they did that later on. I think it was like seasons 5 or 6. They said, hey, we all want to be paid $1 million an episode because
season 8.
Oh, it was season 8?
I believe it started in season 8.
Well, they want to be paid $1 million an episode because they're like, you know, all 6 of us are super important. And they all went in there at the same time to try to do the deal because they're like, you know, you don't have friends without one of us friends. We're the show. So if you want
they wanted to make sure that everyone got the same amount because they were all equally equally the main cast members.
Yeah, so whatever they worked out, they also have royalties from whenever if Friends goes back on Netflix and Netflix pays the syndication fees to get it to stream again, whatever revenue comes in for that, percentage of that is going to go to the actors again because of whatever royalty fee they agreed upon to the studio in their contract.
Basically, they never have to work a day in their life.
I hear that.
Yeah. For the biggest shows, definitely. Like you'll get those, I don't know what they call it, but it's like certain checks with a certain name that they get every so often. I think it's like every 3 months. Most studios do that. And it's
after that, they're just doing it for the love of it, because they sure as heck don't need to.
I follow Martin a lot. They're doing new Martin episode, but it's on a streaming platform.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed that too, because Martin started off with just syndication, and then now, since it's popular, they're like, they're streaming. I don't know where. I think it's Paramount.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they worked out some deal, and if it's still the same show, then that actor probably still has their same deal, and they're just building on top of that. If it's kind of a spin-off, that might be, it really depends on the wording and the contracts of what.
I feel like, I was gonna say, I feel like there must be, like, someone must have come up with it already, a contract agreement where it's like, I'll pay you the royalties for like 10 years or something. Just make sure they don't have to pay them forever. Or something. Like I can imagine them trying to pull something like that just because of how lucrative those royalties can actually get.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the last thing I'll say on ratings and viewership is, like, because networks still rely on Nielsen, and because Nielsen does a statistical sampling where they're picking out people in a group, and saying, okay, this blue guy or lady or whatever that is represents all the rest of these blue people. It doesn't always have to be about race. I'm just saying because these are different colors. And, some are orange, some are black, some are blue and yellow. But, race is actually one of the factors in whenever they grab their sampling. They say, okay, maybe this is 18 to 34-year-old Black males, and they do genders and ethnicities, and they do age,
sex as well.
Yeah, the sex, and so like
whether it's male or female.
And so they grab a sample of that, and just because I'm the same age as a white guy down the street doesn't mean that me and him are going to like the same thing. And so there is a fault with that kind of sampling, which is with any survey or anything you ever take. It's always based on that kind of stuff. Any survey results, they can't actually survey the entire nation or the entire world. So it's always based on a sample. Like,
all they can really do is
for the most part, we had 100 white males that were 26 years old, and 90 of them said this. So we really believe 26-year-old white males like this show, or don't like it based on what they said.
Yeah, at the end of the day, all they can really do is try to do the best they can with the similar data, because there's no way they're going to get to know every single personality. That's why it's so valued to those social media companies selling people's data and analytics and all that kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, it's very hard. They only have so many factors to try to determine what someone would like or what someone wouldn't like. And at the end of the day, everyone's different. Life experiences, all this kind of stuff play huge factors as well. So
that's another thing with with streaming services. They also look at engagement in the way that how spread out is this getting on social media? How many people are talking about this thing? Because that spreads awareness for their brand and for their service. It's kind of like free marketing for them. So even if a show doesn't have as many subscribers or viewers, they might say, well, everybody talks about the show every time a season comes out. And sometimes that's why you'll see a show that's kind of made just to get people mad and start talking about it and trashing it, or just being like, oh, I disagree with this. And because it causes engagement, it gets people talking about it. And then other people are curious to see it that haven't, and then more subscribers. So it's a lot of stuff like that also goes into the kind of deciding on whether a show gets canceled or renewed.
Yeah, any publicity is good publicity sometimes too.
Yeah, for the most part, for that is true.
For them, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right, the next thing we're talking about is what is being greenlit. This comes from industrialscripts.com. Letter A in the syllabus. This doesn't have much to it. It's pretty obvious. If a pitch is successful, it's given a green light, meaning someone offers financial backing and the production is good to go. With screenwriters, most don't get their first scripts greenlit or sold, but after several scripts written, a screenwriter may get some or one sold and greenlit. They might sell one as well, but that doesn't mean it's ever going to get greenlit and made into an actual show, because a production company can just hold on to that after they buy it until they die. They don't have to ever make it because they bought the rights to the script. Doesn't mean they have to make it into a film. So that doesn't mean necessarily they're going to have a greenlit show just because they sold it to a person or a company. This comes from beverlyboy.com, letter C in the syllabus. For films, before a project is greenlit, it must have the script finalized and mutually agreed upon by the film production company, the studio, and/or investor backing the financial side. Lead actors must be chosen and committed, or at least provide a letter of intent that they plan to be part of the production. The budget needs to be prepared and mutually agreed to. Funding sources must be in order with fully executable agreements from investors. You must have proof of funds from the investors to account for costs. Being greenlit or being given the green light just means the basic development stages are complete and the project will be financed. So the production team can begin full on in pre-production. And even then, it doesn't mean the show's ever going to come out. If it has a lot of problems, it could be canceled and stopped during pre-production. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything to add about that? Yeah, it's pretty basic, pretty simple. Just means everything's good to go. You're past the first phase, development is done, and you're starting pre-production. All right, next we're talking about TV contracts. This is from thebalancecareers.com. It's letter A in the syllabus. It talks about news stations, but I believe some of this actually carries over to other TV content as well. I'm just gonna go to that. TV contracts typically have a term for how long you are committed to the show or how many seasons you're attached. So it might be multiple seasons if they want lead actors. They have to have multi-season contracts in case they get renewed. And inside the contract, it's going to have stuff about that doesn't mean you're going to get paid for the full amount. It doesn't mean that we're going to film you for 3 seasons, but if we get the funding for the next season and get the network to agree to it or the streaming service, then you are required to come and act again on the show for the next season. And that way they don't lose their lead actors, because, obviously a change of a lead actor would ruin the show. Or maybe not ruin it, but it would definitely hinder it. Some contracts for TV will have non-compete clauses, which state you can't work on other shows with other networks for a certain period of time during or even after your work with them. So sometimes it depends on how big the actor is. They might say they want to work on 2 things at once and they're given the go-ahead. Sometimes they have some in their contract that says they can't, but then they're still able to for like some voiceover work or something like that. But for any like news stations, of course, and TV personalities like talk show hosts and stuff like that, they're always given those clauses because they don't want them to go on to a different talk show or a different news station and be the head anchor on 2 shows. But for like entertainment, narrative projects, it can be one or the other. It just depends on the production. A lot of them will say like, if it interferes with our show, you can't do it. Even if they don't care about if they go on other shows, they still say, if it interferes with our stuff, you're not doing it. And then the actor has to sign to that, of course, with the contract. This thing comes from, I think you pronounce it Quora. So take it with a grain of salt because it's just an individual person. But they say that major stars in a typical show get paid yearly and get paid whether they are featured in all of the episodes or not. There are typically morals clauses in contracts which state that actors or major crew don't act inappropriately on or off set, or they're able to terminate the contract. And we've talked about this as many other contracts. This isn't just TV, but it's just basically don't make us look bad for hiring you, that kind of thing. And if you do, then we're able to fire you off the show. If a major crew member or actor hasn't breached their contract, but the studio wants them out, they may have to buy the individual out of their contract. So it may be pretty expensive to get them to terminate their agreement if they didn't breach it. If they didn't do anything inappropriately, but they're just not working for the show, then they have to just like try to get them to leave on their own. And if they can't, then they have to buy them out. And how much is it going to cost for you to leave the show? That kind of thing. Other contracts have series regulars get paid only in episodes for which they appear, but they get a salary. And then other contracts for non-regular actors get paid on a per episode basis. And that's because they're not there all the time. They're just there for, 1 or 2 episodes or a side character. Maybe they appear every so often. So they're not going to be in most of the season. And they'll get paid per episode, while the other ones get paid either salary and while the main actors get paid yearly. Some contracts do what's called an option agreement, where the studio has the option, but not obligation, to bring the actor back for another season. And if they choose to bring them back, the actor is obligated to come back. So that would be what it's called, option agreement. That's like if they think they might get a second season, but they're not sure, then they do an option agreement for the actor and say, this is your contract. And you also have the option, we have the option to bring you back to be the lead in a season 2, if we choose. And then of course, they're not going to choose that if they don't get the funding and the green light for season 2. But if they do get the green light and the funding, then they call in the actor and say, hey, we are exercising our option, and you are going to have to come in according to your contract. And the actor is obligated to come back to be the lead again. Other than that, from what I can tell, TV contracts have pretty much most of the same language and clauses as a film contract. As always, if you get a TV job, or if you act in a TV show, it's always best to get an entertainment lawyer to check over the contract before signing anything, as no two contracts will be exactly the same. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything to add about television contracts? A lot of the other stuff that's in there, you're going to find what we talked about during film documents and forms, whatever semester that was, where we were talking about the film contracts and the language within it. And a lot of it's very similar.
Yeah, you start to learn a lot, and you start to, like, if you see like similar contracts, they start to like make sense. I mean, a big contract like that, yeah, you'd want an entertainment lawyer to look at. If you're doing smaller contracts, I would just look it over and not worry so much, especially if you get used to dealing with them all the time. You would just flag anything that seems kind of odd. Because on smaller contracts, you're not, like, say you're working all the time, you're not going to be paying it or going to an entertainment lawyer all the time on small contracts, but definitely for a big one. I mean, you would maybe the first time if you're really nervous.
Yeah, but you always read over the entire thing, make sure there's no wording.
Oh, yeah.
To your judge. Because on a smaller contract, if they say, you know, if you work in our thing, you can't work in something else for 5 years, and then you agree to it without reading it, then they can hold you to that contract or sue you if you breach it, even though it's not really affecting them. So you always want to look over it, make sure that it's all good to go. But yeah, exactly. If it's not something really big, as long as there's no language in there that you don't understand. If you understand all the language, you understand what it all is, especially after you've been doing it for a while, then just make sure you read it over and know what it requires and what it doesn't, and put any terms in there that you need to make sure it's good on your side. After you've done it a while, you'll start to understand what you need and what you don't. But yeah, if you can, it's always recommended to get an entertainment lawyer, just to double check anyway. All right, so other than that, all I'm going to say is Monday, we are watching Lord of the Rings, the first one, for miniatures. We're going to look at the miniature designs of a lot of the sets they used, and then we're going to watch the film as we do that. And we are going to make an exercise out of that will also be due on August 4th, where we each make a miniature set and either do a picture or a short clip with it to make it look like a scene. And then the last thing is the other exercise where we're making a prop, any prop. That's also going to be due August 4th. So try to have that stuff done by August 4th so that we can all look at it at the same time. I hope you all have a good week. I'm going to stop recording, but yeah, you can go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, did you want me to share my project real quick? Do you have 5 minutes?
Yeah, go ahead.